The savage storm whipped across the Montana Territory like God's own fury, lashing the once tranquil waters of the Yellowstone River into a churning, violent monster that devoured everything in its path. Watching from the hillside, Wyatt Novak felt his heart sink as the final wooden beam of Stillwater Bridge surrendered to the raging current with a sickening crack. The sound echoed through the valley like a gunshot, carrying with it his hopes of reaching the woman who'd haunted his dreams for months. It was 1878, and the untamed western frontier offered little mercy to those who couldn't adapt. The storm had been raging for 3 days, transforming dirt roads into impassable mud pits and gentle creeks into deadly torrents. Most folks in Copper Creek had the good sense to stay indoors, but Wyatt wasn't most folks. Not today. Not when Delilah Taylor's life hung in the balance. He'd received the telegram just yesterday morning. Influenza had swept through the Taylor homestead. Delilah was fighting to save her younger siblings alone since her father had passed last winter. The town doctor was stranded on this side of the river, and she needed help desperately. Needed him. Wyatt squinted through the rain, water cascading off the brim of his hat as he studied the far bank. The Taylor place sat nestled among pine trees about 4 miles beyond the crossing. Under normal circumstances, it would be an easy ride. But circumstances weren't normal. Damn it all, he muttered, sliding from his horse's saddle. The big roan stallion, Thunder, snorted anxiously as another bolt of lightning split the sky. Wyatt had known Delilah since she was 16 and he was 19. They'd grown up as neighbors, though the river had always separated their families' lands. She'd blossomed from a spirited girl into a fiercely independent woman of 22 now, with copper-colored hair that caught the sunlight like fire and eyes green as spring grass. He'd been smitten for years, but had never found the courage to tell her. That courage had finally come last month when he'd asked her to accompany him to the town's Founders' Day dance. The memory of her smile when she'd accepted had sustained him through weeks of brutal cattle drives. But he'd returned to find tragedy had struck. Now, with the bridge gone, Delilah and her siblings were cut off from help. No bridge means we make our own way, Wyatt said to Thunder, patting the horse's neck. You stay here, boy. This isn't a crossing for horses. He began stripping down to his union suit, removing his heavy duster, gun belt, and boots, securing them in his saddlebags. From his pack, he retrieved a coil of rope and his hunting knife. If he was going to reach Delilah, he'd need to be lighter, faster against the current. Upstream about 50 yards, he spotted what he was looking for: a massive fallen cottonwood, its roots torn from the earth by the storm. The tree wasn't long enough to bridge the gap entirely, but it would give him a starting point. Securing one end of his rope to Thunder's saddle horn, Wyatt took a deep breath. If I don't make it back, find your way to town, he told the horse, knowing full well the animal couldn't understand but speaking the words nonetheless. The rain pelted his face as he approached the fallen cottonwood. The water raged below, brown with silt and churning with debris. One misstep would mean certain death. Wyatt wasn't a religious man, but he found himself whispering a prayer as he stepped onto the slippery trunk. The journey across the makeshift bridge was treacherous. Twice his foot slipped, and once he nearly plunged into the waters below, saved only by his quick reflexes as he hugged the trunk. When he reached the end of the cottonwood, he faced the most dangerous part: a 15-foot gap of open water before reaching the far bank. Tying the rope around his waist, Wyatt took 3 deep breaths and leapt into the churning current. The cold hit him like a physical blow, driving the air from his lungs. The river seized him instantly, tumbling him beneath the surface. Fighting panic, he kicked hard, breaking the surface with a desperate gasp. The rope went taut, and Thunder's strength kept him from being swept downstream. With powerful strokes, Wyatt battled the current, inching his way toward the far bank. His muscles screamed in protest, his lungs burning as he finally felt his feet touch the muddy river bottom. Dragging himself onto the bank, he collapsed, chest heaving. But there was no time to rest. Untying the rope, he secured it to a sturdy oak tree, creating a lifeline across the river. He needed to return. Wyatt retrieved the small waterproof packet from around his neck that contained dry matches and tinder. Starting a small fire beneath the shelter of a large pine, he dried himself as best he could before pulling his spare clothes from the waterproof oilskin he'd tied to his back. Partially dry and dressed again, Wyatt began the 4-mile trek to the Taylor homestead. The rain continued to fall, though less violently now, and the mud sucked at his boots with each step. His mind raced with worries about what he might find when he arrived. The sun was beginning its descent when the Taylor place finally came into view. It was a modest homestead, a sturdy log cabin with a small barn and corral. Smoke rose from the chimney, a promising sign that someone was still tending the fire. "Delilah," he called as he approached, not wanting to frighten her. The door creaked open, and she appeared, rifle in hand. When she recognized him, the weapon lowered immediately. "Wyatt, how in heaven's name did you get here?" "The bridge is gone," he finished for her, climbing the porch steps. "I crossed downriver." Her eyes widened. "You swam? In that current?" She looked past him as if expecting to see his horse. "Where's Thunder?" "Other side. Had to leave him." Up close, Wyatt could see the toll the last days had taken on her. Dark circles rimmed her eyes, and her normally rosy complexion was pale with exhaustion. Still, she was the most beautiful sight he'd ever seen. "You shouldn't have come," she said, though her voice betrayed her relief. "It was too dangerous. Your telegram said you needed the doctor. How are the little ones?" She stepped aside to let him enter. The cabin was warm, the air heavy with the scent of medicinal herbs. "Timmy's fever broke this morning. Martha and John are improving too. I think the worst has passed, but they're weak as newborn lambs." In the far corner, 3 small forms were bundled in blankets on pallets before the fire. The children aged 7, 9, and 12 had been Delilah's responsibility since her mother died birthing the youngest. Now, with her father gone too, she carried the burden alone. "I brought medicines," Wyatt said, removing a small parcel from inside his shirt that had somehow stayed relatively dry. "And I know a thing or two about nursing fever cases." "You risked your life?" she whispered, taking the package with trembling hands. "Why would you do something so foolish?" Wyatt removed his hat, suddenly aware of how his soaked hair must look. "Because you asked for help. That's all the reason I needed." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Delilah turned away first, busying herself with examining the medicines. "You should get dry," she said. "There are some of Pa's old clothes in the trunk that might fit you. I'll make some coffee." While Delilah tended to her siblings, Wyatt changed into her father's clothes, a flannel shirt and worn canvas pants that were slightly too short but dry. He helped her prepare a simple supper of cornbread and bean stew, grateful for the warmth of the cabin as the storm continued to rage outside. As night fell, they sat by the fire, speaking in hushed tones to avoid waking the children. "The river will be impassable for weeks," Delilah said, staring into the flames. "Even when it recedes, it'll take time to rebuild the bridge." Wyatt nodded. "Your supplies holding up?" "We have enough flour and dried goods to last a while. Game's been scarce with the weather, though. I can hunt when the storm breaks," he offered. Then, clearing his throat, he added, "That is, if you don't mind me staying." She looked up, surprise evident in her expression. "Stay? I can't exactly leave you all alone out here with 3 sick children and no way to get help. Besides, I'd have to cross that river again, and once was enough for this lifetime." A small smile played at the corners of her mouth, the first he'd seen since arriving. "I suppose you're right. But where would you sleep? The cabin's not exactly spacious." "The barn will do just fine. I've slept in worse places." "Nonsense," she replied firmly. "You'll freeze out there. We'll make a pallet here by the fire. I won't have you catching your death after you've done so much to help us." Later, as Delilah checked on the children one last time before retiring to her small bedroom, Wyatt added wood to the fire. The storm had settled into a steady rainfall, drumming on the cabin roof. "Wyatt," her voice was soft from the doorway of her room. He turned to find her standing there, a quilt wrapped around her shoulders. "Yes. Thank you for coming. Not many would have done what you did today." "I'm not many, Delilah. I'm just me." She smiled, then a real smile that reached her eyes. "Good night." "Good night," he replied, watching as she disappeared behind her door. As Wyatt settled onto his pallet, listening to the rain and the soft breathing of the sleeping children, he knew with certainty that his crossing had been worth every risk. Whatever came next, he'd face it gladly, because he was exactly where he needed to be. The storm continued for 3 more days, transforming the world outside the cabin into a sodden, muddy wilderness. Wyatt fell naturally into the rhythm of the Taylor household, chopping wood, tending the animals in the barn, and helping Delilah care for her recovering siblings. The children took to him immediately, especially young Timmy, who followed him like a shadow whenever his strength permitted. On the morning of the fourth day, Wyatt woke to golden sunlight streaming through the cabin windows. The storm had finally broken. He stepped outside onto the porch, breathing deeply the fresh, rain-washed air. The landscape had been transformed, trees uprooted, new streams carved into the earth, and in the distance, the Yellowstone River still surged far beyond its banks. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Delilah spoke from behind him. "After all that destruction, the world still finds a way to be beautiful." She stood beside him at the porch railing, her copper hair loose around her shoulders, catching the morning light. Without the worry of the past days etching her features, she looked younger, more like the carefree girl he'd known before life had heaped so many responsibilities upon her. "I was thinking I might try hunting today," Wyatt said. "The children could use some fresh meat to build their strength." "That would be wonderful." She hesitated, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Wyatt, I've been meaning to ask. What about your own responsibilities? Your ranch, your cattle? Surely someone's missing you by now." It was a fair question. Wyatt's small ranch was managed primarily by himself and two hired hands, brothers named Carlos and Miguel, who were capable enough to handle things in his absence. "The Vasquez brothers know what to do. They'll keep things running." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "Besides, I'd rather be here right now." A blush colored her cheeks, and she looked away toward the distant mountains. "You're a good man, Wyatt Novak." "Better than we deserve." "That's not true," he said firmly. "You deserve every bit of help and more. You've been carrying this place on your shoulders since your father passed, raising those children alone. If anyone deserves some support, it's you, Delilah Taylor." She blinked rapidly, fighting back tears. "I'm not used to having someone to lean on." Impulsively, Wyatt reached out and took her hand. It was small in his, calloused from hard work, yet still somehow delicate. "Well, get used to it. At least until that bridge is rebuilt." She didn't pull away, and they stood in comfortable silence, watching as the sun climbed higher, burning off the lingering mist from the valley. Over the next 2 weeks, they settled into a partnership that felt as natural as breathing. Wyatt hunted, repaired storm damage to the cabin and barn, and began teaching John, the oldest boy, the basics of trapping. Delilah kept the household running, tended her small garden plot, and sewed new clothes for the growing children. In the evenings, after the little ones were asleep, they would sit by the fire and talk. Wyatt learned about her dreams of expanding the family's small apple orchard, while he shared stories of his time driving cattle in Texas before settling in Montana territory. With each passing day, the connection between them deepened. One evening, as they sat shelling peas on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink, Delilah broached a subject they'd both been avoiding. "The river's gone down considerably," she observed. "Jacobson from the next property rode by yesterday while you were hunting. He says men from town are already talking about rebuilding the bridge." Wyatt nodded, his hands continuing their steady work. "It'll take time, but yes, they'll rebuild. And when they do," she left the thought unfinished. "When they do, I'll be able to bring the doctor to check on the children properly," he said, deliberately misunderstanding her implication. She set down her bowl of peas with a sigh. "Wyatt, you know what I'm asking. When the bridge is rebuilt, will you go back to your ranch permanently?" He looked at her then, taking in the concern in her eyes. "Is that what you want?" "Of course not," she admitted softly. "These have been the most peaceful weeks I've had since Pa died, despite everything. Having you here." She shook her head. "It sounds foolish to say aloud." "Say it anyway," he encouraged. "Having you here makes me feel safe. Makes me feel like everything might actually be all right." Her eyes met his, vulnerability evident in their green depths. "But I can't keep you from your life because it makes mine easier." Wyatt set aside his own bowl and moved closer to her on the porch bench. "Did it ever occur to you that being here might be what I want too?" Her breath caught. "Why would you want this?" "A struggling homestead, 3 children who aren't yours, a woman with nothing to offer but hard work and harder times ahead. You really don't see yourself clearly, do you? He reached up, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. Delilah Taylor, you are the strongest, most dedicated, most beautiful woman I've ever known. Any man would be lucky to share your burdens and your joys. Are you saying? She couldn't finish the question. I'm saying that crossing that river wasn't just about bringing medicine or responding to a call for help. His hand lingered near her cheek. I crossed because the thought of you in trouble tore me apart. Because I've cared for you for years, but never found the right words to tell you. Tears welled in her eyes. Why now? Why tell me this now? Because nearly drowning has a way of clarifying what matters, he said with a small smile. And because every day here with you and the children has only confirmed what I already knew. I love you, Delilah. Half for longer than I care to admit. A tear spilled over, tracking down her cheek. Wyatt gently wiped it away with his thumb. I never thought, she began, then collected herself. After Pa died, I resigned myself to a life of just getting by, of raising the children and maybe, someday, when they were grown, finding some happiness for myself. I didn't think there was room for anything else right now. And now, she covered his hand with her own where it rested against her cheek. Now I'm wondering if perhaps I was wrong. If maybe happiness doesn't have to wait. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Wyatt leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle, questioning, and when she responded by leaning into him, it deepened into something more certain. When they finally parted, both were breathing unevenly. I love you too, she whispered. I think maybe I always have. The moment was interrupted by a small voice from the cabin doorway. Lila, I'm thirsty. They broke apart to find Timmy rubbing his eyes sleepily. Delilah composed herself quickly, rising to tend to her brother, but not before giving Wyatt a smile that promised they would continue their conversation later. That night, after the children were asleep, they sat closer together than usual before the fire. Plans were made, dreams shared, possibilities explored. They decided that when the bridge was rebuilt, Wyatt would return to his ranch to set affairs in order, but he would come back. They would marry in the autumn, after the harvest, combining their lands and their lives. Word reached them a week later that the rebuilding of Stillwater Bridge had begun. Crews of men from town and surrounding homesteads had gathered with lumber and tools, determined to restore the vital crossing before summer's end. I should go help, Wyatt said as they stood at the edge of the property, looking toward the distant work site where men could be seen like ants in the distance. It's only right, Delilah nodded, though her expression betrayed her concern. The river's still dangerous. Not like before, he assured her. And this time I'll take the long way around, through Jacobson's Fort. It's a half-day's ride, but safer. When will you leave? Tomorrow morning. I'll speak with the foreman about their progress, lend a hand for a few days, then return. He took her hands in his. I won't be gone long. The children will miss you, she said, then with a smile added. And so will I. That evening, they told the children of their plans to marry. Martha and Timmy reacted with excitement, while John, more serious at 12, asked thoughtful questions about how things would change. Wyatt answered patiently, assuring the boy that his place in the family was secure, that Wyatt wished to be a father to them all, not replace the one they'd lost. Later, after the children were asleep, Wyatt and Delilah stood on the porch under a canopy of stars. He held her close, her head resting against his chest. When I return from the bridge project, I'll need to ride to my ranch, he said quietly. Get things organized there, speak with the Vasquez brothers about the arrangements. How long will you be gone? She asked, her voice small against his shirt. A week, perhaps 2. No longer. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. I've been thinking. My cabin's larger than this one, newly built last year. The land's better for cattle than crops. It might make sense for you all to move there after the wedding. She pulled back slightly to look up at him. Leave the Taylor homestead? This has been our family's land for 15 years. I know it's a lot to consider, he said quickly. We could keep both properties, work them together. Or sell one. Or neither. Whatever you think is best. She was quiet for a long moment, considering. The children have memories here. Their mother and father are buried on that hill. She gestured to a small rise beyond the apple orchard where 2 wooden crosses stood. But, she sighed, the soil here has never been as good as we hoped. Your land has better water access, better grazing. We don't have to decide tonight, Wyatt assured her. Take time to think on it. Talk to the children. Whatever we decide, we'll do it together. She nodded, leaning into him once more. It's strange to have these choices. To have a future that looks brighter than just survival. Get used to it, he whispered against her hair. Because I intend to give you the brightest future I can. Dawn broke clear and cool the next morning as Wyatt prepared to depart. The children had made him promise to bring back candy from town, and Delilah had packed him enough food for twice his journey. Thunder, who had been recovered from the far bank days earlier when Wyatt had made the long journey around through Jacobson's Ford, was saddled and ready. 3 days, Wyatt promised as he embraced Delilah one last time. 4 at the most. Then I'll be back. Be careful, she whispered. Those bridge workers are using dynamite to clear debris. Don't get yourself blown up after surviving that river. He laughed, kissing her soundly. I'll keep well back from the blasting. Promise. With final waves to the children, who stood on the porch watching his departure, Wyatt rode out, following the road that would eventually loop around to Jacobson's Crossing and then to the bridge construction site. The journey was uneventful, and by mid-afternoon of the following day, Wyatt arrived at the bustling work site. Nearly 30 men swarmed over the remnants of the old bridge and the new construction. Massive support pillars were being sunk into the riverbed, while others worked on cutting and shaping lumber for the span itself. Novak, a familiar voice called. Wyatt turned to see Sheriff Daniel Harrington approaching, his silver badge glinting in the sunlight. Heard you were stranded on the far side. Made it back, I see. Good to see you, Sheriff. Wyatt dismounted, shaking the lawman's hand. Came to lend a hand with the rebuilding. We can use it. Trying to get this done before the first snow. Harrington studied him with shrewd eyes. Spent all this time at the Taylor place, did you? Wyatt nodded, knowing that news traveled fast in small communities. Delilah and the children needed help. They'd all been sick. The sheriff's expression remained neutral. Folks were worried when you didn't return to your ranch. Sent the Vasquez brothers to look for you, but the river stopped them. They're managing things in your absence, I hear. They're good men, Wyatt confirmed. I'll be heading there soon to check on things, once I've helped here for a few days. Harrington nodded slowly. Well, you can bunk in the work camp tonight. We've got tents set up over yonder. Foreman's name is Burke, big fellow with the red beard. Tell him I sent you. Wyatt worked alongside the bridge crew for the next 3 days. The labor was hard but satisfying, setting support beams, hauling lumber, helping position the massive crosspieces that would eventually support wagon traffic. In the evenings, the men gathered around campfires, sharing stories and passing bottles of whiskey. On the 3rd night, as Wyatt sat nursing a tin cup of coffee, Burke approached and settled beside him. Hear you're sweet on the Taylor widow's daughter, the foreman said without preamble. News travels fast, Wyatt replied evenly. Burke shrugged his massive shoulders. Small territory. Not much happens that folks don't talk about. He took a swig from his own cup. She's a fine woman from what I hear. Strong. Had to be, with all she's faced. She's the strongest person I know, Wyatt agreed. Planning to marry her, are you? This fall. Burke nodded approvingly. Good. Those children need a father figure. River did you a favor, washing out that bridge. Wyatt raised an eyebrow. How do you figure? The big man chuckled. Forced your hand, didn't it? Made you cross over, stay a while. Some men need a push to do what their hearts are telling them. Wyatt couldn't argue with that logic. Suppose you're right. Bridge should be passable by end of the week, Burke continued. Not finished proper, but sturdy enough for a single rider or light wagon. Another 2 weeks for completion if the weather holds. That's good news. I'll head back to the Taylor place tomorrow, let them know. Wyatt finished his coffee. Then I need to visit my ranch, get some matters sorted. Building a life takes work, Burke observed sagely. More than building bridges, and that's saying something. The next morning, Wyatt bid farewell to the bridge crew and began the journey back to Delilah's homestead. He chose to take the shorter route this time, following the river upstream to Jacobson's Ford. The water level had dropped considerably, making the crossing manageable for Thunder. As he rode, his mind filled with plans and possibilities. He'd need to speak with Carlos and Miguel about their willingness to take on more responsibility at his ranch. There was the matter of legally adopting the children to consider, as well as the decision about which property would become their primary home. So preoccupied was he with these thoughts that he almost missed the telltale signs of trouble ahead. Thunder noticed first, ears pricking forward as the scent reached him. Smoke, not the controlled smoke of a campfire or chimney, but the thick, acrid smell of a structure burning. Wyatt's heart plummeted as he urged Thunder into a gallop, cresting the final hill before the Taylor property came into view. What he saw made his blood run cold. The barn was engulfed in flames, thick black smoke billowing skyward. Even from a distance, he could hear the frightened neighing of horses trapped inside. Figures moved frantically around the structure, Delilah and the children, trying to battle the blaze with buckets of water from the well. Wyatt spurred Thunder harder, covering the remaining distance at breakneck speed. As he approached, he could see the fire had already claimed most of the barn. The cabin, thankfully, stood untouched about 50 yards away. "Delilah!" he shouted, leaping from Thunder before the horse had fully stopped. She turned, her face streaked with soot and tears. "Wyatt, the horses. We can't get them out." Without hesitation, he ran toward the burning structure. The heat was intense, the smoke choking. He could hear the panicked animals inside, trapped in their stalls. "Stay back," he ordered John, who had been attempting to approach the barn door. "Take your sisters to the cabin." Tying his bandana over his nose and mouth, Wyatt braced himself and plunged into the inferno. Inside, the smoke was blinding, the heat unbearable. He could make out the shapes of the two work horses in their stalls, rearing in panic. Moving by memory and instinct, he reached the first stall and fumbled with the latch. The horse inside bolted past him the moment the gate swung open, nearly knocking him down. The second horse was more difficult. Terrified beyond reason, it had pressed itself into the far corner of its stall. Wyatt forced his way in, grabbing the halter and pulling with all his strength. For a moment, the animal resisted, then suddenly surged forward, following the path of the first horse out into the open air. Wyatt turned to follow, but a burning rafter crashed down, blocking his path. The smoke was thicker now, searing his lungs with every breath. He dropped to his knees, searching for a way out through the choking blackness. A hand seized his arm, pulling him sideways. Through watering eyes, he made out Delilah's form. She had entered through a side door he'd forgotten existed, used for throwing hay into the loft. "This way," she shouted, her voice barely audible over the roar of the flames. Together they stumbled toward the small exit. The heat was blistering, clothing beginning to smolder. With a final desperate lunge, they burst through the doorway into the blessed coolness of the outside air, collapsing onto the grass several yards from the burning building. For several minutes, they simply lay there, coughing and gasping. The children ran to them, faces white with fear. Young Timmy threw himself onto Wyatt's chest, sobbing uncontrollably. "You came back," the boy cried. "You came back just in time." Slowly, painfully, Wyatt sat up, holding Timmy close. "Is everyone all right? No one's hurt?" Delilah nodded, still fighting to catch her breath. "We're all safe. It started so suddenly. Lightning, we think, from the storm last night. Must have smoldered in the hay all morning before catching properly." Wyatt looked at the blazing barn, now fully consumed. There was no saving it. The horses got out. That's what matters. If you hadn't come when you did. She couldn't finish the sentence, fresh tears spilling down her sooty cheeks. He reached for her hand. "But I did come. I'm here now." As they watched, the barn's roof collapsed inward with a tremendous crash, sending a fountain of sparks into the afternoon sky. The heat was too intense to approach, so they could only stand and watch as the structure that had stood for 15 years was reduced to embers and ash. Later, after they had washed away the soot and tended to minor burns, they sat together on the cabin porch. The children, exhausted by the day's events, had been put to bed early. The remains of the barn still smoldered in the distance, but the danger of the fire spreading had passed. "It's a sign," Delilah said quietly, staring at the ruins. "The barn first, then what? The cabin? The orchard? This land doesn't want us anymore." Wyatt put his arm around her shoulders. "It's not a sign, just bad luck. We can rebuild." She shook her head slowly. "No, I've been thinking about what you said, about moving to your ranch after the wedding. I think it's the right decision now." She turned to face him. "This place. It holds memories, yes, but also so much struggle." Maybe it's time for a fresh start. Are you certain? He asked, searching her eyes. It's a big decision. I'm certain, she replied firmly. We'll take what matters: Pa's tools, Ma's china, the family Bible. We'll visit the graves when we can. But the children deserve more than just surviving on stubborn pride. They deserve to thrive. Wyatt kissed her gently. Then that's what we'll do. We'll sell this land to someone who can make something of it, and we'll build our future together at Crescent Ridge. Crescent Ridge, she repeated, a small smile forming. Your ranch has a proper name and everything. Our ranch, he corrected. And yes, named for the crescent-shaped ridge that borders the north pasture. Wait until you see the sunset from the front porch. It'll take your breath away. They talked long into the night, making plans and dreaming of possibilities. The bridge would be crossable within days, allowing Wyatt to return to Crescent Ridge and begin preparing for their arrival. They would marry as soon as possible, not waiting for autumn as originally planned. Life's too uncertain to delay happiness, Delilah said, resting her head on his shoulder as the last embers of the barn glowed faintly in the distance. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that. I couldn't agree more, Wyatt replied, holding her close under the vast Montana sky. Stars spread like diamonds overhead. True to Burke's word, the bridge was passable for horseback riders within the week. Wyatt made the journey to Crescent Ridge, his heart lighter despite the physical distance from Delilah and the children. He found his ranch in good order, thanks to the Vasquez brothers' diligent care. We wondered if you'd been swept away in the flood, Patron, Carlos said as they walked the property, checking fences and cattle. Nearly was, Wyatt admitted. Found something worth staying for on the other side, though. He explained his plans to the brothers, who received the news with genuine enthusiasm. The Taylor children? We know them from town. Good kids, Miguel noted. And Miss Delilah is respected by all. You chose well, Patron. Think you two can manage if I make you foreman? I'll still oversee things, but with a family to raise, I'll need trusted hands. The brothers exchanged glances, then Carlos grinned. For increased wages, see, we can manage. Wyatt laughed. Knew you'd drive a hard bargain. Done. The next week was a flurry of activity. Wyatt cleared out the small office in his cabin to create a bedroom for the boys. The main bedroom would be his and Delilah's, while Martha would take the small room that had previously been a guest chamber. He purchased new bedding, stocked the pantry with supplies, and arranged for the town seamstress to visit and help with curtains and other feminine touches the bachelor cabin had always lacked. When everything was as ready as he could make it, Wyatt rode back to the Taylor homestead. The journey felt different now, filled with anticipation rather than the desperate worry of his first crossing. He found Delilah and the children packing their belongings. The charred ruins of the barn had been cleared away, and a for sale sign had been posted at the edge of the property. Jacobson's interested, Delilah told him as they sat together that evening. Wants to expand his orchard. Says our land gets better morning sun than his. That's good news, Wyatt said. His money's as good as anyone's. The sale was arranged quickly, with Jacobson agreeing to a fair price that would give them a comfortable cushion as they began their new life. They would depart in 2 days, taking only what could be loaded into Wyatt's wagon and leaving the heavier furniture for Jacobson, who was glad to have it. On their final night in the cabin, after the children were asleep, Wyatt and Delilah stood on the porch one last time. Any regrets? He asked, watching her gaze drift toward the hill where her parents were buried. Some sadness, she admitted, but no regrets. This place gave us what it could. Now it's time for someone else to try their hand. She turned to him, moonlight silvering her copper hair. Besides, how could I regret anything that led me to you? The next morning, they loaded the wagon with trunks containing clothing, books, family heirlooms, and tools. The children were excited, treating the move as a grand adventure. Even John, initially the most reluctant to leave, had warmed to the idea after Wyatt had described the creek that ran through Crescent Ridge, perfect for fishing. Their final act before departure was to visit the graves on the hill. They stood together as a family, saying their private goodbyes. Delilah placed wildflowers on each grave, and Wyatt promised aloud to care for her and the children as her parents would have wanted. As they drove the wagon away from the homestead, Timmy turned to Wyatt with solemn eyes. Are you our pa now? Wyatt glanced at Delilah, who nodded encouragingly. Not officially yet, little man. First your sister and I need to get married. Then, if you'd like, I'd be honored to be your pa." "I'd like that," Timmy said decisively. "I don't remember our real pa much anymore." "He was a good man," Wyatt assured him. "And I'm not trying to replace him. Just to be here for you now, like he would want." They reached Stillwater Bridge by midday. The structure was still under construction, with temporary planking laid across the support beams to allow limited crossing. Wyatt halted the wagon, studying the rushing water below. "Is it safe?" Martha asked nervously from the back of the wagon. "Burke said it would hold a light wagon," Wyatt replied. "And he's a man who knows his business." Nevertheless, he helped Delilah and the children down from the wagon. "We'll lead the horses across slowly. You all walk behind me, one at a time. John, you bring up the rear and keep an eye on your siblings." Delilah squeezed his hand. The river's not going to win this time either. The crossing was tense, but uneventful. The temporary bridge creaked and swayed slightly under their weight, but held firm. When they reached the far bank, Wyatt felt a symbolic threshold had been crossed. More than just a river separated the past from their future. They arrived at Crescent Ridge as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. The main house stood on a gentle rise, a sturdy log structure larger and newer than the Taylor cabin had been. A freshly painted barn and corral stood nearby, along with a bunkhouse for the ranch hands. As they approached, Carlos and Miguel emerged from the bunkhouse, waving in welcome. Wyatt had asked them to make themselves scarce for the arrival, wanting Delilah's first impression to be of a home, not a working ranch with men everywhere. "Welcome to Crescent Ridge," Wyatt said as he helped her down from the wagon. The children scrambled out, immediately running to explore their new surroundings. Delilah stood for a moment, taking it all in: the well-maintained buildings, the verdant pastures where cattle grazed in the distance, and beyond, the crescent-shaped ridge that gave the ranch its name. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "More than I imagined." Wyatt took her hand, leading her toward the house. "Come see inside. I've been working on it all week." The interior was rustic but comfortable, with polished wooden floors and large windows that flooded the rooms with light. Wyatt had arranged everything as best he could, even placing wildflowers in a vase on the dining table. "The bedrooms are through here," he explained, showing her the changes he'd made to accommodate them all. "It's not perfect yet, but it's perfect," she interrupted, tears welling in her eyes. "It's absolutely perfect." They were married 3 days later in the small church in Copper Creek. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, attended by neighbors, the Vasquez families, and several of the bridge builders, including Burke, who had given himself the day off for the occasion. Delilah wore a new dress of pale blue, ordered from a catalog months earlier for the Founders' Day dance, but never worn. The children stood beside them, officially becoming a family as Reverend Miller pronounced Wyatt and Delilah husband and wife. "You may kiss your bride," the Reverend said with a smile. As their lips met, sealing their vows, Wyatt thought of the raging river that had nearly claimed his life. Had the bridge not been destroyed, had he not made that desperate crossing, who knows how long it might have taken for him to recognize what was truly important. Sometimes, he reflected as he gazed into Delilah's radiant face, the greatest obstacles lead to the greatest blessings. The river had swallowed the bridge, but in doing so, it had given him the courage to cross on foot and claim the future that awaited him on the other side. 5 years passed, bringing changes to Crescent Ridge and its inhabitants. The ranch prospered under Wyatt's careful management and the Vasquez brothers' dedication. The cattle herd doubled in size, and they added sheep to diversify their income. Delilah established a thriving kitchen garden and orchard, selling preserves and dried fruits to the mercantile in town. The children flourished in their new home. John, now 17, showed a natural talent for ranching and worked alongside Wyatt and the hands. Martha, 14, had her mother's gift with plants and helped manage the garden and orchard. Young Timmy, at 12, was proving to be a natural with horses, gentling even the most spirited colts with a patience unusual for his age. And there was a new addition, 3-year-old William, born in the 2nd year of their marriage. With his mother's copper hair and his father's steady gaze, he was the joy of everyone at Crescent Ridge, doted on by his older siblings and the ranch hands alike. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Wyatt surprised Delilah with a picnic by the creek that ran through their property. They sat on a blanket in the dappled shade of cottonwood trees, watching William splash in the shallow water under John's watchful eye. 5 years, Delilah mused, leaning against Wyatt's shoulder. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you came stumbling out of that river, half drowned and determined to help us. Best foolhardy decision I ever made, he replied, kissing the top of her head. Though I do prefer using the bridge these days. She laughed, the sound still capable of warming his heart like nothing else. Remember when we went back to visit my parents' graves that first autumn? The river nearly took the wagon. I remember. Jacobson's done well with that place, though. The orchard looks better than ever. They fell silent, comfortable in their shared memories and the present moment's peace. In the distance, the new Stillwater Bridge stood strong against the Yellowstone's flow, a testament to human perseverance and the community's determination to connect rather than remain divided. I've been thinking, Wyatt said after a while, watching William giggle as John helped him catch tiny minnows in a tin cup. Maybe it's time we built that bigger house we've been talking about. The children are growing, and this one he patted Delilah's slightly rounded belly, where their 5th child was just beginning to show, is going to need space too. She smiled, covering his hand with her own. I'd like that. Something with a proper parlor for when the Reverend visits, and enough bedrooms that Martha doesn't have to share with the baby. Consider it done. We'll start planning tomorrow. Do you ever wonder, she asked thoughtfully, what would have happened if the bridge hadn't washed away? If you hadn't had to cross that river to reach us? Wyatt considered the question seriously. I'd like to think I would have found my way to you eventually. That some things are meant to be, regardless of the path taken to get there. Very philosophical, Mr. Novak, she teased, though her eyes were soft with emotion. I have my moments, Mrs. Novak. He pulled her closer, breathing in the scent of her hair's sunshine and lavender and home. But I'm grateful every day that the river gave me the push I needed. Some men are too stubborn or too blind to recognize happiness when it's right in front of them. And some men, she replied, turning to kiss him properly, are brave enough to cross raging waters for what matters most. William came running up then, wet and excited, a tiny fish cupped carefully in his small hands. Look, Pa. Look what John helped me catch. Wyatt examined the minnow with exaggerated interest. That's a fine fish, son. Better put him back so he can grow bigger for next time. As William ran back to the creek with John, Delilah leaned her head on Wyatt's shoulder once more. We've built something beautiful here, haven't we? Something that will last. Looking around at the thriving ranch, at the children who had accepted him as their father, at the woman who had given him more joy than he'd ever thought possible, Wyatt nodded. Yes, my love. Something that will outlast bridges and rivers and all the obstacles life puts in our way. The sun began its descent toward the crescent ridge, painting the sky in brilliant hues of gold and crimson. Another day was ending at Crescent Ridge, but their story the one that began with a desperate river crossing and a love strong enough to overcome every challenge would continue flowing forward, as steady and true as the Yellowstone itself.